Cool. All right, here we are. So we got our ball, right? Now I think we want to actually make this thing bounce around the screen. So if we go under blocks over here, well, there's two ways to make it bounce, right? One is we can just click on our ball and give it an initial speed and heading, right? However, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually do it over here. Maybe we can do like once we click on our canvas, right? We can start the ball, right? So under here, under canvas, it would say when canvas dot touched, right? We can start our ball moving. All right, so ball dot, so we can do some like set ball heading, all right? And we also need to set the ball's speed, which is right here, right? And I'm fine with the defaults. I'm fine with the default interval over here, 100, right? Because just a reminder what interval does, right? This is the number of times per second that this thing actually happens, right? So in the case of move, it would be 100 times per second this thing would move, right? Does anyone know a minimum value that I should have for that? Does anyone know about how our eyes work in frames per second? Does anyone know what movies are shot at typically?
Yes. 60.
Movies are typically 60. Right? There's also 120. So you're in like a cartoon, for example. Like if you fire up an old cartoon, right? They typically operate on less than 60 frames per second. Like if you watch like the Flintstones. Has anyone ever seen the Flintstones? Do we know what that is? Cool. What's that? It is totally about cavemen. Absolutely, yeah, that one. Right? So that one's at probably like 15 frames per second. Right? So you can kind of see some choppiness in there, but it's still mostly fine. Right? Yes, sir.
Typically they do 24 because that was kind of deemed as like the lowest one you could go without it seeming too choppy.
I see. Yeah. So maybe it's 24. I don't actually know. Yeah. You might know more about this than me.
60 frames each second.
Not necessarily.
Well, I mean,
So,
if you're editing, you could kind of click and drag and that. But like in the old days, yeah, they had to draw 60 times per second.
right, they had to actually draw a whole bunch of little images.
That's why it took like 20 years to make a 3-minute film, right?
Right, something like that, totally. Right, and there's a whole bunch of little tricks they can do, so they can reuse the background stuff. But anyways, we want to do at least 60 frames per second. That's about what your eye can register. So we're at 100 right now on our ball, right? So that's totally fine. So what I want to do is I want to change my heading and my speed, right? If you think about heading, it's like nautical stuff, right? That's the direction we're going. Yes, sir.
Wait, but isn't 110 times a second?
100 would be 100 times per second, I think.
Huh?
Is it not 100 times per second?
I thought that was
Right, interval?
milliseconds.
100 milliseconds, 100 times. No, this is the number of times per second for interval,
Really? Okay.
right? And if you click on ball, I think it'll tell us that. It should be anyways. That would be my guess.
No.
Let's see. So if we hover over that, is the interval in milliseconds. For example, if the interval is 50 and the speed is 10, the pixel will move 10 pixels every 50 milliseconds. Oh, I see. So if we have it on 10, it's so this is every X milliseconds. So potentially we want to do it, let's see, how many milliseconds are there in a second? 1,000?
No.
Right,
Yeah.
so we want to do it every 10 milliseconds probably. So right now this is 10 times per second. I see. Yeah, I think you're right, Gray. So we want to do this probably about 100 times per second, or 1 over 60 over 1,000, something like that. But 10, this will be pretty quick, right? And so we'll set our speed, right? This is the number of pixels it moves each time this thing happens, right? So let's say I pick, I don't know, 50. Cool. What is this ball going to look like?
It moves 50 frames per second.
No. Good try though. Cool, talk to your neighbor. What happens if I set my speed to 50? My interval is at 10.
So it'll move 50.
Yeah, just set this on here.
Yeah, it'll move 50 pixels every 10 milliseconds.
Cool, I can't help you right now. Can you give me 10 minutes?
Wait, are we on for canvas one touch? Is it in ball or canvas?
So when I touch the canvas, I'm going to start the ball moving. So right here, when canvas one dot touched, I'm going to change all my ball attributes. Yeah. Right, cool. So, Rian, what did you guys come up with? What is this gonna look like? Sorry, Gray, I'm not gonna call on you. What did you guys come up with? So what does this 10 mean? We hover over that. It is the interval in milliseconds in which the sprite's position is updated. So how many times per second is that going to happen? Cool, I'm going to call on someone else. Chris. This Chris, left Chris. My right. Yeah, Chris. What is that going to look like? How often is that going to update? Yep. Yeah, I'm talking to you. I should learn your guys' last names. So can I get some feedback? Is this too hard or too easy?
Just a bit confused.
Just a bit confused. Cool.
Tiny bit.
So my question is basically, before we actually run this, I want us to be able to make some educated guesses about what is this going to look like when we run it. So we have set the interval to 10. Right? We have set the speed to 50. So if we hover over this thing, right, it says the interval in milliseconds at which the sprite's position is updated. For example, if the interval is 50 and the speed is 10, the sprite will move 10 pixels every 50 milliseconds, right? That's a nice little overview for what this does, right? So my speed right now is 50, my interval is 10.
So that'd be 10 milliseconds.
So every 10 milliseconds, it is going to move 50 pixels. Is that good or bad?
I think that's really fast.
I also think that is very fast, right? My whole screen's about 400 tall and about 300 wide. So every 10 milliseconds, it's going to move 50 pixels, right? So it's going to take 8 iterations to go all the way vertical, right? And this thing's going to be firing 100 times per second, right? So it's going to be bouncing all over the place. Too fast, probably, right? So a more reasonable value for this? 2. I like it. Right, so now it's going to take about 2 seconds to go from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen because we're at 100 times per second. The screen's 400, right? So it's going to go about 200 pixels per second. So about 2 seconds to go over the whole screen. Does everybody see kind of where I'm getting these numbers from? Cool. Heading. Let's hover over that. The returns the sprite's heading in degrees above the positive x-axis. 0 degrees is towards the right of the screen. 90 degrees is towards the top of the screen. So if we have a nice little XY thing here, right, this would be 0, right? This would be 90, right? What is this guy?
180.
180. And Ethan, what is this one over here? It is not also 90. Cool, remember we got think about an angle, right? So we got 0, right, as we increase, right, we get towards 90, right, and then over towards 180. 270. Right, a typical circle has 360 degrees in it.
Wait, but shouldn't the 0 be on top and not?
0 is here. This is just where they decided 0 was.
What?
It's a perfectly reasonable thing. So if I were to set my heading to 140, talk to your neighbor, which direction are we going in a cardinality thing, like north, south, east, west.
And the ball.
If I were doing 140 degrees, which way are we kind of going? Talk to your neighbor.
Oh, wait,
It doesn't matter. If I'm going that direction, which way am I going? Cool, talk to him. If I set my heading to 140, which way am I going? Northwest, right? It would be like that. Totally. Nice. Yep. Yeah, we're going to get there, right? So I'm going to set this to 140 because why not? I think it's a perfectly reasonable number. All right, 140. All right, cool. I think that is enough to just try out our game. All right? And you'll note that it's hardly a game at this point. But if I fire up my emulator, as usual, it takes quite a while to actually get started. Right, so what I've done is when I launch my game, I click my screen, it should start my ball moving. Right? And I would recommend kind of building this along with me. If I'm going too slow for you, feel free to zoom ahead. I'm basically going to build a bouncing ball. Yes, sir?
Could I set the heading to like pick random?
Totally, absolutely, right? Set it to a random thing. What is a reasonable range for the random value you'd do?
I would do like 0 to 180.
Maybe 0 to 180, so it's always going to be going up to start, right? I think that's a good idea, right? Because you don't want to have it immediately going down so that you lose the game right off the bat. Right, cool. When I click, right, boom, boom, there it goes. Do we like that speed?
That is
You like that
so
speed?
Slow.
No, what's wrong with it? It's a bit slow, I agree. Cool.
Mine isn't
Let's
even
change this thing to 4. Right now, you'll note, just a reminder, if we want to reset our thing, right, we can change this to, whoops, we can change one of these attributes, right, and then just change it back so it'll reset our game. Right now, when I click, right there, it's going twice as fast. It's still pretty slow, but maybe that's okay, right? This is on easy mode. Right, and you'll note that you can add a little thing. Maybe you can add a slider at the bottom of your game so that you can change that, right? You can have them start at a faster speed. Right. Anyways, so next thing we want to do is we want to add bouncing, right? And that is going to be again in our ball here. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. I'm just going to kind of quickly zoom through what we have here. We have when ball dot collided with other, right? So that's basically when we crash into another sprite, right? We could choose to do nothing, right? We could have them pass right through. Right, we could have it bounce off. We could have it increase our score. We could have it just randomly change directions. Right, that's kind of up to you. Right, when ball dot dragged. Right, has anyone ever played like a pool or mini golf, like billiards pool or mini golf on your phone? Right, you can like fling the ball. And that could be a fun way of doing it. We have ball dot edge reached. That's what we're going to be using for bouncing. We have ball dot flung. We have no longer colliding with. Right, so when they were colliding, if they were overlapping, right, once they stop colliding, then this thing will fire. We have touch down, touched up, so touch down, that's one, touch up is another, or just touched is doot, right, just bop it. All right, we got all this other stuff. Call ball dot bounce, call ball dot colliding with others. Now you'll note that we can look at the puzzle pieces and kind of figure out what these are going to do. So calling ball dot bounce is an action, right? I would say tell my ball to bounce. Whereas this one over here, ball dot colliding with, that's more of a question, and we can see, based on the puzzle piece, that's a nice little, you can maybe see that on here. That's basically going to give us a value back. So this one's really an action, this one is a question, right? It's a method that returns a true or false, right? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff in here, but I think we've actually covered enough stuff to make it bounce off our walls. So what I'm going to be doing is when we reach the edge, so when ball.edge reached, cool, and let's actually hover over this because this gives us a whole bunch of information about how we bounce. So we say, let's see, it says event handler called when the sprite reaches an edge of the screen. If the ball is then called with that edge, if bounce is then called with that edge, the sprite will appear to bounce off the edge it reached. Edge here is represented as an integer that indicates one of 8 directions: north, northeast, east, southeast, south, southwest, west, and northwest, right? So there's a whole bunch of different integer values for those. So if I want to have it bounce off my west wall, right, you can see we would call ball.bounce -3, right? And that would bounce off the west wall and make it go east instead. Right, now, we don't actually need to hard code any of those values in there, but that will be something that's important later. So if I want to make it bounce off of whatever wall I hit, let me get out of here and zoom out a little bit. If I want to bounce off whatever wall we hit, right, it would be ball.bounce. Right, if we hover over this guy, same idea. Right, makes the sprite bounce as if off a wall. Right, so it does not need to be off a wall, but it needs to be off of something. Right, and that's basically asking us which edge should we bounce off of. Right, so if we hit an edge, right, so let's look at our code here real quick. When Just move this out of the way.
Yeah, that's happening.
So when ball.edge reached, I want to basically have my ball bounce. Right? Now this error message right here, arguments are the wrong number of arguments for bounce. Can somebody tell me why that's happening?
Because you don't have an edge that's set.
Totally, right? And why is that actually happening in my app right now? It's because I am constantly having that event happen, right? My ball is at the top left of the screen, and so therefore it wants to bounce, right? It is doing edge reach every single time, right? Every 5 seconds this error message is popping up. So what I wanted to make it do is basically have it bounce off that edge. And you'll note that this method actually gives us an edge right here. So I can just do get edge, stick that right in there, right? And now you can see, boom, boom, right? My ball has successfully bounced, right? So you can see right now it's closing in on the east wall. And once I hit that, right, it's going to say when ball.edge reach, this event is going to happen, right? And it's going to say call ball.bounce off of whichever edge I just hit, right? So it's going to tell me which edge I hit. All right, so that'll basically have us bounce off of all of our walls. Any questions about how I got that?
So the edge is a variable. You made it a variable.
Totally, the edge is a variable, right?
So when it hits the wall, it bounces. But how do you know how it bounces in a certain set? Like, can you choose which degrees, like which angle it bounces?
You could, right? Now that's actually a bit more complicated. That won't be the bounce. So bouncing is basically that it's going to fire off in whatever angle we kind of came in on. So let's see if I can grab a marker somewhere. So if we got our edge here, right, and if we're coming in at this angle, right, it's basically going to bounce off at the same angle. These are kind of congruent angles, right? If I bounce off of this angle, right, that's going to be kind of like that, right? So there's another angle. Right, so it totally just bounces at the same kind of thing there.
What is heading do?
What does heading do?
That just tells it which direction.
Oh, okay.
Totally,
That's
right?
the angle.
So when you think like heading on a boat, right? Like what heading are we at? We're at 12 degrees or whatever, right? So it's just what direction are you at? So it's in degrees from 0 to 360. Cool. The last thing I want to do is actually just have it bounce off of an object, right? So what we need to do is actually add an object on here. And that I'm going to actually be using an image sprite because I don't want to be using a ball for that. So if you drag an image sprite onto here, I need to actually get an image. Right now, in my example previously, I just used a like chunk of black, right? And so what I did is I literally just like Googled the word black. Although you can use whatever you want, right? And so I just literally took one of these pictures, right? I downloaded it, so I did save image as. So this is how you can make kind of a basic, background image, right? So you can take that black thing I just downloaded, right? This guy here. I don't know if you guys know how to edit images in preview. How many people know how to edit images in preview?
Wait.
Oh yeah.
Search up like a black rectangle and then just find it with a transparent background.
Oh, totally. You could use a black rectangle with a transparent background. I agree with that. I would say this is a skill that it might be helpful for you guys in other classes though anyways. You're totally right though. That's probably a better strategy. But if you want to just take this black thing and make your own, right? If you hit this, what is it? This thing right here. So it's called Show Markup Toolbar. People use this thing before or no? Right, so if you click that, you can edit your image, right? So you could like draw on it if you wanted to, right? Like I could make this my, right, crazy happy face, right? I'm not going to do that, but you could do that. Right, so what I want to do is I want to crop this guy, and that is with edit. Let's see, how do I crop? One of these things is crop. Command K. So I select a certain range. Right, and you can also see on my screen here, right, it's telling me the pixel size. So I want it probably about 200, maybe 200 wide. And then kind of this shape. And then Command K. And boom, boom, there's my image, right? And I just save that.
Or can't you just input it and I want to put it on
you don't want to fill parent. You want to have it be a certain size. right? I think, and this is one of the limitations with App Inventor, is that you need to actually, if you want to use an image, you need to make it the right size. So then I just go into my picture, I choose the one I just built, which is on my. So my screen is about 300 wide, roughly. And you can also go in and make this thing wider. So I could change this to be like 50 pixels wide. Oh, actually, I take that back. So you can see on here, what I did is I changed the width to 50, but the picture's still really big. Right, so I don't really want to do that. So I'm just going to leave this as automatic. And this is now easy. Whoa. Shoot. I'm going to delete that and try again.
That's a lot of damage.
Let's see, width. I'm going to fill in with an image.
Oh my god.
All right, boom, boom, there's my sprite. Cool, so the last thing I want to do is actually have it bounce off of the sprite. I'm going to kind of leave us here and give this as a little challenge for you guys. What I will say is it's going to involve colliding, and it's going to involve this bounce method, right? So you want to, when you collide with this thing, try to bounce off that. I'm going to leave that as a little challenge for you guys. Some of you may have already figured this out, but it is slightly harder than what we did before. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah, it is.
So it won't turn out. It worked yesterday on Saturday.
Let's see. This is our star one.
Wait, how do you
I'm still surprised that it doesn't work.
I tried same thing out.
No, I hit your head. I shot your head. Your brain went down. No, what happened if the sound